My first book was a book that I wrote about my circumstances, Surrendered Sleep. It's probably not 8 million, it's probably 9,684,032 on the Amazon bestsellers book. You got to get this book because one way or another, if you read this book, you're going to get a good night's sleep. But sometimes we have to fall forward, don't we? Sometimes we have to take the first step. When I wrote this book, this was really something that I didn't realize it, but this was something that was coming out of my own circumstances. I face a lot of different challenges in my life and in my surgical career. First of all, there's the things that race through my mind as I go to bed. Did I do this today? Did I forget this? Is that anastomosis that I sewed together? Is that going to heal tonight? Are they going to call me at 3 o'clock in the morning? Those kind of things race through my mind. And I think we all have those circumstances. And then the other thing is that I'm constantly being called in the middle of the night. People call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, "Hey, Doc, what you doing?" Why are you calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning? Is this something really, are they bleeding to death? Because if they're not bleeding to death, can it wait till 7 o'clock in the morning? So anyway. I didn't take all my medicines today, by the way. Hey, but just thinking about this. And so then also I have some physical things. I struggle with sleep apnea. And so I have all of these dynamics coming together. And as I began to think about my life circumstances, I began to realize that God had a lot to say about sleep. I mean, sleep was God's idea. And not to get into the book too much, but understand that as I began to write this book, I began to realize that this book was for other people too, but it was more about me. Do you ever have that experience as a writer when you're writing your devotions or something and realizing that there's that connection between your circumstances, writing about what you know, about who you know, and the lessons that you've went through? So just kind of thinking all that together, how grace energized me as I began to look at all this stuff from different aspects and put all these components together about sleep, how that helped me dramatically. And understanding that, fixing my physical problems was also linked to my spiritual issues. And a lot of the ways that I was addressing people and treating people was because I was sleep deprived all the time. And as I began to work through all those things, all those things are linked. It really began to make a big impact on my life. So the other thing I realized is that, sometimes, like I said, we fall forward. Right? Sometimes we have to make that first step. And this was a self-pubbed book, which I learned so many things through that process. First of all, I learned what not to do. Have you ever had that experience? I learned what not to do. And so, but also I learned a little bit about how to do a good media interview. I learned how to do some interviews on the radio. I learned about how to make connections and all that kind of stuff and kind of begin to make those small steps into being an author. So my next book was a little different. I wrote it completely different. The first book I wrote more from a theological perspective because I wanted to get all the Bible verses right and get it right. I didn't want to mess up. This book was completely different. I kind of realized that I wasn't connecting with people. And so I wrote it more from an emotional level. But this also ties into my experiences. Two of my greatest challenges are time and distractions. I don't know about you guys. Yes. But I am constantly, it seems like there's always somebody who wants to distract me, And fortunately, I have some good distractions too. I have Joanna, the best person to see on the worst day of your life, on the best day of your life, and I have my kids. But other than that, I'm constantly being distracted. And there's constantly this time where I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do my writing. And one of the things I realize is that I can't write a long novel, this complicated story, because my brain is always being distracted. And so I had to take little bitty stories and make these little bitty tiny chapters, very similar to devotion, and take these, and because of my circumstances, it changed the way that I had to write. I was never going to be able to write a book like a big long novel that's complicated, a 10,000. So I made little bitty stories, like when you're speaking or when you're maybe teaching Sunday school class, there's that little story that you tell people, that little home run story with a little message. And that's kind of where Spoonfuls of Courage kind of surfaced. And I've got another book hopefully going to come out called Spoonful of Courage for Caregivers. They're kind of the forgotten sufferers. So thinking about that, how, and also I face these circumstances, these things that happen that you just can't wrap your mind around. I mean, emotionally, how do you deal with these things? I mean, like we had a little girl that hung herself. We had this little girl that came in, Dad was cutting down a tree and the tree fell on her. And now every time we go into town, sometimes I'll see this family, and of course when they see me, just these emotions. I mean, how do you deal with these kind of things? And so I began to realize that my writing, it was for other people, but it was also a way for me to begin to process these life events that I was going through. Once again, God places these circumstances in your life for a purpose and for an outcome. So that's kind of what we started with the Spoonful of Courage. And so, once again, if you think about how does grace change our response, first of all, we draw upon God's resources. So think about this. On a second level, whatever self-help guru you want to read or whatever talks about maximizing your performance. And I think so many times as writers, we focus on the technique. We focus on how to build your platform, how to do Facebook, how to do a YouTube, how to do this, how to do that. We focus on performance instead of drawing upon God's resources. When we focus on God's resources, His creativity, His ingenuity, His initiative, it takes us to a whole different level of writing. So once again, we experience freedom from stress and worry. Once again, because when we understand that ultimately, who's responsible in this equation? God's responsible, I mean, that kind of frees us up. Yes, it doesn't minimize our responses, but God is responsible for all of these things, and it frees us from a lot of stress and worry and anxiety. So often, if we're functioning on a lower level, we can look and see when we're stressed and we're worried and we're anxious about things, and we're not bringing grace into the equation in our lives. So once again, instead of performing for acceptance, on this level, performance flows from acceptance. Based upon the completed work of Christ, you're accepted already. And that's good news, isn't it? And so once again, there is a performance that flows out of that as writers. But just understanding that instead of performing for acceptance, performance flows from acceptance. And really our part begins to kind of join with God and figure out what He's doing, what the outcome He wants us to do, and when He initiates, we respond in cooperation. So, God supplies, we apply, if you're looking at your little sheet. So I want to talk about a little bit different twist here now, because all of us, I think, are in that issue of, okay, I'm a nobody knows who I am, and one of the problems with publishing is that you're trying to get your name out there, you're trying to get your work out there, and how do you do that? So this is my COVID story. So I was in Niger working in a hospital training surgeons when the president closed off the United States. And so I was trying to get a plane back into the United States, and this is a girl, by the way, this puts COVID in a whole different perspective. When you think about the fact that in some parts of the Sahara Desert, there are no doctors. There are no ventilators. There are no resources. And so, but as I was on the plane coming back, I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? Because once again, elective surgeries have been canceled. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but as a surgeon, I eat what I kill. Okay, that went over your head. Okay, but just thinking about that. So, I mean, I don't get a paycheck. I mean, I have to perform to be accepted, right? I mean, I live in that world. And so, what am I going to do? And so, one of the things that I've done, this idea came across my brain. Hey, I'm a doctor. I've written a book about sickness and suffering. Man, what a great opportunity. I mean, here we are in the COVID crisis, and I've written a book about sick and suffering. There's going to be a lot of people that are going through a lot of things and a lot of issues. And so what I did is I got a publicist, and I started doing radio interviews. I'd already had some experience doing radio interviews. And my publisher, for some reason, decided to give my book away for free on Amazon. So, which was great because I had about 4 reviews. And so, yeah, I mean, can somebody say, yes, I identify with that? So I began to go with that. I probably did 100 interviews talking about different aspects of COVID and vaccines and all this stuff, and giving away my book for free. And that really was a way for me to help kind of catapult my work into a different level.